Welcome to a new series of conversations with experts in various fields that are important to architects. My name is Marcus Marino, and this is the American Institute of Architects of New York State Conversations on Topics. There'll be a series of these throughout the year, and we hope is a program which we will continue going forward, helping educate legislators, fellow architects, and all citizens as to the importance of design within our built environment, which architects are most suited to help out in. Thank you, and then please enjoy them.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here to talk about sustainability. Thank AIA New York State for putting on this panel discussion. And I'm going to start by reading very brief bios of each of our volunteers. Bruce Fowle. FAIA founded FX Fowle over 38 years ago and has guided the firm to international recognition for excellence in design and pioneering socially and environmentally responsible architecture and planning. Paul Bauer, thank you for coming, AIA principal at Dattner Architects, which is known for doing many communal and civic buildings. And as a design leader, Paul has taken an iterative and research-based approach to architecture. Claire Weiss, FAIA, is an architect and urbanist and founding principal of WXY, which works on waterfronts, buildings, involved in Rebuild by Design, and award-winning East River Blueway Plan. John Tobin, on my left, is an architect with EYP, and he oversees the work of architecture, engineering, and energy groups, and is spearheading the integration of these disciplines. Thank you all for coming. I want to just open the discussion by talking about architects and allied professionals in the realm of sustainability and how we know that all the decisions, the millions of decisions that we make in designing buildings affect how we use our natural resources, both in constructing buildings and how they operate. We know that the effects of our buildings on the environment and the operations and greenhouse gas emissions are critical today. In fact, Bruce just told me that we've reached 400 parts per million. I think what has really changed in the discussion is that so many of our elected officials now recognize the importance from our President Obama saying climate change is the 21st century issue, to Governor Cuomo that has ambitious goals of 50% renewable energy for the grid in New York State, to the Mayor de Blasio, who 2 years ago announced that New York City would reduce its greenhouse gas emissions 80% by 2050. Even city council officials say environmental justice is social justice. So I think what's changed for our profession is that we now have a much broader conversation and people really looking, hopefully, to us for solutions in this area. Not to say there aren't challenges, but there are tremendous opportunities right now for us to take the lead in really transforming how we build our buildings. Bruce, this is not new to you. In 1999, the Condé Nast building, a beautiful skyscraper right in the middle of Times Square, was built with sustainable goals. LEED, Passive House wasn't even on the lips of anyone. No. How did you do it? And what do you see that's different now from then in terms of challenges?
Well, let's take it back to 1993, when actually through a DDC initiative in New York City, we became members of the cult, of the sort of green cult at that time, which was a very small group of dedicated people all over the country, but it was a gathering in New York, and we were accepted in because the city had recognized our previous efforts. And then in 1995, Jody and Douglas Durst came to us and said, we'd like you to design a building in Times Square, mentioned nothing about green, but we knew from prior experience with them that they were greening their buildings by changing mechanical systems and so forth. So we started out, and then eventually, as you say, in the nitty-gritty decision-making process, we eventually sort of realized that we could do something very special here. And the largest green building in the country at that time was 50,000 square feet. It was a corporate headquarters, California. This was going to be 1.6 million square feet. Nobody was prepared for this. The industry was not prepared. But the beauty was that the clients really allowed us to do all the research. They sponsored guests coming in from all over the world to advise us on all the different systems and so forth. But there were no metrics at the time. There was nobody could define a green building. It was just sort of catch as catch can, and we didn't want to make it overblow it. But then we realized that we were saving 49% in energy, so we said, okay, green building, and that took off. Hopefully, we like to say we took the green movement out of Birkenstocks and into pinstripes.
Not an insignificant concept, actually, to do that. Did it cost more at that time and significantly?
Hard to get numbers out of clients, but I think it was in the 10% range. But everything was new. Right now, there's almost nothing that you would have to pay a premium for in the same building.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Actually, if we fast forward to today, an award-winning project that both Paul and Claire worked on, a little salt shed and sanitation garage, of all things, was just constructed. And can you talk a little bit about where we are coming from 1999 to today and thinking holistically about our buildings?
Well, that's really a question of really getting government buy-in to the sustainable project. So that project was begun under Local Law 86, which was the precursor to Local Law 31, mandating reduction in energy usage and incorporation of sustainable strategies. And I think what that really does is the government support for that makes it possible for the designers, specifically in the public realm, in public architecture, to engage in a dialogue with the end users, with other project stakeholders in the community about delivering a project that uses less energy, is a good steward of our available resources, both energy, materials, and quite frankly, financial resources, to deliver projects that are that really enhance the overall health and well-being of the workers as well as the community. So essentially a healthy building, healthy community.
And it was even used in the fashion show.
Yes, and recently, yes, the salt shed was part of a fashion shoot. I mean, how many times can you expect a salt shed to become the backdrop for a fashion show?
Well, it shows the power of design, is what I would say.
Yeah, right.
And actually,
Claire.
an interesting fashion show too, because the fashion designer, I think, inspired really not only by the architecture but the people that work there, noted that there was all these uniforms, and people are starting to get interested in workwear again and that functionality. And he used recycled uniforms from the Department of Sanitation as his the basis for his fashion wear. And in fact, it's a great link to the kind of design thinking that went in between our firms, the real collaboration between operations, performance, and being on a waterfront location where when we started the project, it was below the design flood elevation. Right. And speaking of high performance, because of the way it was designed, it was able to be adjusted midstream, as Paul knows, so that, in fact, by the end of the project, actually, it's a resilient building.
Yes.
Which, of course, is our future, and you have a lot of experience in that. But talk a little bit, when you mentioned recycle, certainly how we build our buildings to last, and we don't put it into a sanitation landfill.
Right.
What is your philosophy on that?
Well, I think that when the movement started out, it was really focused on the fact that our building fabric and our cities not only consume a huge amount of energy, and during different decades, those buildings can be more or less inefficient, but really the embodied energy in a in a building is so huge that that's where the numbers come from, of why architects are so responsible for the future of our planet. So the way I look at it is about healthy neighborhoods, as Paul said, which is our older buildings had to figure out a lot of factors about being a good neighbor and about being in dialogue with what not only the function of that building was today. They expected buildings to be around for 100 years. Now only public buildings are expected to last about 50 years. Many of the buildings we invest in and we design as architects are really almost throwaway buildings, and that only makes sense if you're reusing the material, which is what's so great about adaptive reuse. In a sense, that means that you can go into, you don't know the function, but you're reusing a building, adding new pieces to it, creating better performance, but ultimately you're recycling the building as opposed to, and I think that's an important way to look at urban design going into the future.
And I think another, key element to add to that is that, in a sense, we're sort of returning to the way buildings used to be designed. Before you could air condition, you had to really think about natural ventilation.
Exactly.
Before the, proliferation of electric lighting, you had to really think about how am I going to light this space naturally. And this, return to that, I think is, I'd be interested in seeing the demographics of architects and their, let's say, buy-in to sustainability and how that works on a sort of age curve.
Yes, that's true. And although sometimes we do need engineering. So John, your goal in your firm is to integrate architecture and engineering.
Yeah, we're a very integrated firm, and I think exactly what you're saying, that whole idea about we need to really start to think about what is it that we can get that is essentially for free. And when we start to design these high efficiency buildings and these high performance buildings, the thing that we look to do is, in particular, is daylighting. It is probably one of the greatest sources that we have to really make an impact on the energy usage of a building. And then it comes with a whole other bunch of side effects, which has nothing to do with energy use. People just feel better. People are more they're more productive, and the space just looks a lot better. And so understanding and speaking with our engineers about what are the strategies that will get us to measurable energy performance. Having the engineers at the table and energy consultants at the very first moment allows us to ask questions, but will that actually have an impact? And when we're able to say, yes, it will probably, have some sort of a reduction of X, Y, and Z, then we're able to say, okay, then, we're on the right track here. I think the other thing that we really, rely on our engineers for is that ability to trade off things that from an architectural perspective are possible strategies, but you're wondering how does one impact another. So we've had some buildings where our first thought was it needs to be super efficient, so we should put on a double skin outside wall. We should really, we need to make this envelope. And then by actually running it through some of the modeling, we're able to see that, well, that's going to reduce your daylight. It's going to be a lot of work. The skin becomes a system in itself. So you really have to factor that in. And when we see the impact versus the strategy, we're able to say, okay, so what are those strategies that we're able to do? And it's interesting because daylighting goes right to the top, LED, responsive LEDs, and so the architect is now able to say, okay, these are the strategies that will start to lead to high performance, and therefore I'm going to design with those in mind. In other words, I have a very now sense of clear criteria on which I can base my design. And so it's a really great synergy and a really great collaboration between all the various specialties of building design to be able to sort of get those kind of questions answered almost at the outset of the process. And it really allows you then to move forward with confidence, knowing what the end result will be and not sort of suddenly getting late in the design process where suddenly the numbers start to show up and things aren't working out.
Yes, you hope it is a matter of design in the system, and I know there's a lot of talk about is passive house an igloo? What does it look like? In fact, AIA was invited up to meet the assembly men up there in terms of what do you mean by this? And I know, Bruce, you've done some studies on this. Architects do care about design and sustainability, so.
Yes, I mean, the beauty is we have the science now. We know how to make really efficient, totally integrated, extremely healthy, well naturally lit buildings through this passive house system. And it's definitely on a very strong movement. It's the new thing in the private sector, development sector. You got to have a new thing so they can market, and it helps that. It's legislatable, just as LEED has been legislatable, but LEED is now getting even tougher. So the legislation has to get tougher. I mean, all of this has to work together. But it's there's no reason to look backwards. I mean, we've got it in hand. We just need to really figure out how to apply it. Local Law 31, which is being considered in New York, is actually putting passive house into their proposal.
Yes, and I think one of the questions is, does it cost more? And of course, there's the architects, such as your firms, that have the knowledge to do this, perhaps not everyone. There is the question of maintenance. Do we need stronger education in terms of people maintaining the buildings and keeping them in a state of good repair? Particularly some of our civic structures, have an uneven history in terms of, the budget and how you maintain buildings and things like that.
But the beauty of passive houses, there are fewer moving parts.
Yeah.
The mechanical systems are getting, they're coming in like this. The only real cost negative is the triple glazing, and maybe the glass industry will somehow solve that in some other way to get the same R values and make it happen.
Well, I think that's where architects really can play a role. We do the specifications, so if we believe in something, it's sort of like the discussion of low VOC paints. I remember originally it was, we can't do
Hard
that.
to
It's like
use.
painting milk on a shower curtain with one developer's,
Right.
can't be done, can't do it kind of thing. But I think if architects, and it did happen, now it's not anymore to have.
But Passive House is really interesting. It's a great name, but it's interesting because it actually uses architecture to create the solution in a way versus using machines versus
Yes.
it goes back to what architects, particularly on the West Coast, were trying to do with housing, when there was an energy crisis, which is use what we're building to be part of the solution. And I think it's so critical for us architects to explain in simple terms that in a way, the way to save money is to make what you're designing part of the solution, not the problem that you have to solve. So a lot of kind of buildings you look around, glass towers, etc., you have to solve them with incredibly sophisticated engineering. But I think it really speaks to the credit of collaboration that Passive House may be the way finally to make it for all architecture just the absolute mean level of designing the right way.
And you
Well, it's
say
also
total-
we now have a minimum 12-inch wall to play with, which instead of the two layers of glass sheer, which every building is doing, looking alike, we now have room to really
You have
play
mass.
and make interesting humanized architecture.
And the overall life cycle cost of a building really has to be considered. I mean, you design for 100 years, let's say, right? You're not replacing that facility 20 years down the road after you've depreciated it. You look at the total energy usage, and I would argue that good design, sustainable design, does not really cost more. It's just a different way of looking at how you value the building.
Well, as you say, Claire, if you put more money into the building without the systems, and that, then it does last and become sustainable and
Right.
not go into landfills for our future.
I think one of the things that, Claire, when you're talking is, in my graduate studies, I'd come across James Marston Fitch, and I always use this quote of his about it's not about sea breezers versus ventilation. It's not about fluorescent lights versus daylight. It's really about understanding when each of those is the correct solution, and to understand what daylight can give you and then what it cannot, and to supplement what it cannot by artificial means. And I think this idea about not sort of just designing something and saying I can take care of it all with mechanical with mechanical means, and saying no, I need to design something that gets us so far along in the process that what I'm doing then is supplementing and understanding how in a very sophisticated way what each of those sort of methods, both the architectural form and the orientation, as well as the engineering systems, can bring to the table. So you get the true high performance from this really interesting blend, this perfect blend of understanding this can give me this and this can give me the what it needs to finish.
Yeah.
I think it's certainly going to take us to lead the way. I hope we will also be bringing the contractors into this discussion, and that's another subject. But I want to thank you all so much for being on the panel.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Really
Thank you.
appreciate it. To be continued.